The centre of gravity for political common sense shifted further west over the weekend because our next panel both join us from Perth. That is Gemma Tognini from GT Communications and Royal Report host Caroline De Russo. Great to speak to both of you over there. I'll come to a Perth issue in just a moment, but first up I wanted to start on a national issue, and let's hear from you first, Gemma, as a small business owner. 3.75%, so getting close to 4% as an increase in the minimum wage. Is small business going to be able to afford this?
Well, I think it depends on the sector that small business is in, of course. So, I mean, minimum wage increases I never really have a problem with, because you're talking about literally people who are typically living hand to mouth. The issue is actually not as much about the increase in minimum wage. In my view, the issue rather is about failing productivity in this country, rising cost of doing business in this country, which is just getting, and this is not me being partisan, this is me reflecting facts and data that is readily available to anyone who wishes to be bipartisan on such an important issue. Productivity is stagnant. We have more red tape, green tape, yellow tape, whatever tape you want. We've got it here in Australia. It is becoming even more a restrictive place to do business. So I suspect that this will hurt people in hospitality most in terms of small business owners. And the problem here is that the government says one thing and does a 180 degree in the opposite direction when it comes to addressing the economic issues of which it has created.
Yeah, I think it's always a difficult one because especially in a high inflation environment, you want people on low wages to get a decent pay rise. They need it, right? But you don't want it to overtip the balance and actually mean that more people are tossed out of work. But sensible economists have suggested that this one may well have struck the balance right. Let's certainly hope so. I want to come to you, Caroline, on the other political issue of the day, and that is Andrew Giles. This drones nonsense that sounded like nonsense the moment it came out of his mouth, they stuck with for a few days, is now exposed as absolute dross, yet this bloke's still in his job. How does this happen?
I'm not entirely sure. And the thing is, we have spoken about this paddler for, I reckon, about the last 3 weeks, Chris.
Paddler.
And every time... Paddler, total paddler. And every time we speak about him and his incompetence, it just gets worse and worse. And this is just the latest barnacle on the record of this minister. Yeah, it sounded a bit unusual to me, but then some of his colleagues in the ministry were trotting it out over the weekend. Minister Murray Watt trotted it out on Insiders, and then it turns out it was absolute rubbish, and it doesn't matter because apparently he's trying, so that makes it all okay. Well, you know what? It's actually not okay. And this here has just become this cumulative issue of just total incompetence. And like I said, we've talked about this many a times. When is this bloke going to be tapped on the shoulder and benched because he does not deserve to pay A grade? He
is hilarious. Here he is, droning on last week.
There is $250 million that we've invested in supporting our law enforcement agencies to enforce that. And that's enabled things like using drones to keep track of these people.
But not happening, absolutely not happening. Gemma, you tell us. I mean, obviously the main problem here is how this guy has completely failed to manage his portfolio, and that's led to exposing Australians to real danger from serious criminals and all the rest of it. But surely when he's just spouting absolute nonsense that his colleagues then have to defend, surely he's then lost the trust of everybody.
Well, this speaks, obviously this is a tremendous example and a pertinent example of why communities have falling and very low levels of trust in their elected officials, because the rest of us have to front up and cop the consequences of our behaviour as and when it occurs. The rest of us know what that's like. It's actually a value that we like to teach our children and our teenagers. You do something, there are consequences, choice, consequences, gravity, all of that kind of stuff. But here you've got this bloke who is on my dime and yours, and may I remind the government and the opposition and please the Greens, you live to serve us. You are public servants. You are paid for by us. You do not, this isn't a flight of fancy to drive your ideological agenda. When you do not cut the mustard, it's time to step aside. So when the government, drops points in the polls and all of that sort of stuff, do they really think the electorate is stupid?
No,
do they really think the electorate will allow itself to be taken for a mug?
I fear they do. I fear they underestimate the electorate and it'll be to their detriment, that's for sure. I want to go to this West Australian issue. It is a national issue, but it's playing out in the West. On the weekend, we had big protests in Perth, Caroline, trying to stop the federal government from actually cancelling an export industry. They want to get rid of live sheep exports.
Yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, Murray Watt was on Insiders on Sunday talking about trade diversity while he's trying to shut down an industry which contributed $143 million to the Western Australian economy this year. So this here is an almost exclusively West Australian trade. 98% of it comes out of WA. And I am so proud of our farmers who, at the busiest time of the year, because a lot of these operations are mixed operations, grain and livestock, these guys are seeding at the moment. 3,000 people, 1,700 vehicles out in convoy from 4 locations around Perth, straight down St George's Terrace, to deliver a message to the federal government. Now, Murray Watt keeps pumping out this rubbish about, 70% of Western Australians, there's an independent poll, 70% of Western Australians want this industry closed. Absolute rubbish. Push poll by the RSPCA, designed to influence rather than analyse.
Yeah.
And he also talks about it, well, it's only 1% of agriculture. Even if it were only 1% of agriculture, it is all interlinked. And you get rid of this 1%, you affect the entire sheep industry, you affect our truckies, you affect our shearers. So well done to WA. And if you haven't signed the petition yet, www.keepthesheep.com.au/petition.
Yeah, good stuff. Madness to get rid of export industries. We're nearly out of time, but Gemma, if I could just quickly get your thoughts on Bill Shorten and his speechwriter. I mean, this was a bloke who's got an NDIS scheme that's just running out of control, wasting money hand over fist. He's got a department with about 100 people in the communications team, yet he's signed up a speechwriter on over $300,000 a year for 2 years. Her name is Julianne Stewart, and good luck to her. What about taxpayers?
Well, look, I mean, I feel I should give Mr. Shorten my card, Chris. That's an extraordinary amount of money for writing speeches. And look, there may be more to that remit than we know. I'm not sure, but it is about prudent use of taxpayers' funds, and I refer to my earlier point about the fact that they work for us. Yeah. Everybody in this country is watching their budgets at the moment. Everybody in this country is watching for signs of recession. And the government, and I say it is always the political left, you can get cranky, but it's a fact, they love to spend other people's money. I love hearing John Anderson talk about when they came into government for the first time, how they went line, chapter and verse through federal budgets to literally eliminate small amounts of money to bring us back to surplus. This, to me, is a very, very bad look for a government that's already under pressure when it comes to cost of living. Yeah, absolutely. The old adage, you've got to look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. This sort of waste is just criminal. Thanks for joining us from the West, Gemma Tognini and Caroline de Russo.